Have you ever been told you're not good enough by the very people who are supposed to build you up? Have you ever had to smile through your tears at a family dinner just to keep the peace? I have. My name is Savannah Reyes, and this is the story of how one Christmas humiliation became the fuel for a victory they never saw coming. The air in my father's house always felt different on Christmas Eve. It was thick with the scent of pine needles from the ridiculously large tree in the foyer, and the expensive perfume my stepmother Cynthia wore like armor. It was a scent of wealth that wasn't mine, in a house that no longer felt like my home. This was their annual family dinner, a high-stakes performance, where I was always cast in the role of the charity case. It was the one night a year I couldn't get out of. An obligation. A sentence. I'd spent a week searching for the right dress. My budget was practically non-existent, a tightrope walk between rent and instant noodles, but I'd found it, tucked away in the back of a small thrift store. A simple, dark green velvet dress. It was soft, with long sleeves and a modest neckline, and it fit me as if it had been made for me. It cost $12. Holding it, I felt a flicker of hope, a foolish belief that maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year, they'd just see me, Savannah, and not the walking disappointment they'd decided I was. I took a deep breath before pushing open the heavy oak door. The warmth and the low hum of conversation washed over me. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter, light and carefree, echoed off the high ceilings. My father's business partners, Cynthia's socialite friends, they were all here, a glittering audience for the evening's drama. My stepmother, Cynthia, and my stepsister Blair spotted me immediately. Their eyes, sharp and critical, did a full scan from my simple black flats to the top of my head. They moved toward me like a pair of beautifully dressed vultures. Cynthia was in a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my car. Blair, her golden child, was a vision in red silk, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. "Savannah, you came," Cynthia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. It was a statement, not a welcome. Blair didn't even bother with the pretense of a smile. Her eyes locked onto my velvet dress, and a cruel smirk spread across her perfectly lipsticked mouth. Her voice was loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. "Oh my God, Savannah, did you forget to change out of your charity donation clothes before you came?" A few people tittered, quickly hiding their smiles behind their champagne flutes. Heat flooded my cheeks. I felt my own smile, the one I'd plastered on my face in the car, begin tremble. I tried to stand taller, to not let them see the words land like tiny sharp stones. "I like this dress, Blair," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Cynthia placed a hand on my arm, her touch cold, despite the warmth of the room. Her voice was a syrupy poison, full of fake pity. "Oh, sweetie, it's brave of you to show up looking so humble." She emphasized the word humble as if it were a disease. "It shows character, I suppose." I looked past them, searching for my father. I found him standing near the fireplace, talking to one of his colleagues. He saw me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of something discomfort, shame, before he quickly looked away, turning his back to me and laughing a little too loudly at something the other man said. That was his role. The enabler. He would never step in. He would never defend me. He had chosen his new family, and I was just a relic from his old life. A piece of unwanted furniture he didn't know how to get rid of. I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest. The humiliation was a physical thing, a heavy cloak they draped over me every time I walked through this door. They mocked me for being poor, for not living up to the sparkling image they projected. I was a failure in their eyes, a loser who worked as a barista while Blair was already managing a department at my father's company. I was a nobody. Hoping to find a moment of peace, I tried to fulfill the one real purpose I had for being here. His birthday was just a few days after Christmas, and we always exchanged gifts at this party. I clutched the small rectangular gift in my hands. It wasn't expensive. I couldn't afford expensive, but it was from the heart. I had spent weeks gathering old photographs of my father and my late mother. Pictures from before Cynthia, before the money, before everything changed. I'd carefully arranged them in a simple hand-bound leather book. I walked over to him as his conversation ended. "Dad? Happy birthday." He turned, his expression softening for a moment. "Savannah, thank you." He reached for the gift, but a manicured hand shot out and intercepted it. Cynthia snatched the book from my grasp. "What's this?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes were like chips of ice. She unwrapped it with a careless flick of her wrist, revealing the simple leather cover. She opened it. Her face tightened as she saw the pictures of a younger, happier version of my father. His arm around a woman with my smile. My mom. Cynthia let out a short, sharp laugh. A sneer. "Oh, how sentimental." She held it up for Blair to see, who rolled her eyes dramatically. Cynthia then held the book between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. "Robert, darling, we really don't have room for all this clutter." She didn't hand it to him. She placed it on the corner of a nearby table, next to a stack of used cocktail napkins. Dismissing it. Dismissing me. Dismissing my mother's memory. I felt the tears welling up, hot and stinging. I wouldn't cry. I would not give them the satisfaction. I stood there, frozen, my hands empty, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when the final blow came. Blair walked past me, a full glass of dark red wine in her hand. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise, as she stumbled, lowering my balance. The entire glass of red wine cascaded down the front of my green velvet dress. A huge, dark, wet stain spread across the fabric, cold against my skin. The room went quiet for a beat. All eyes on me, the girl in the ruined thrift store dress. Blair gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with fake innocence. "Oh, Savannah, I am so sorry. I'm just so clumsy." Cynthia moved in, taking control of the situation. "Well," she said, looking at the stain with disgust, "I suppose that's for the best. That dress was a tragedy anyway." She looked at me, her face hard, all pretense gone. "I think it's time for you to go. You're making a scene and embarrassing the family." "But," I started, looking at my father. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the floor. He said nothing. "No buts," Cynthia snapped. "You were invited as a courtesy, and this is how you behave. Frankly, I'm done. You are banned from future family events until you can learn how to present yourself properly and fit in." Kicked out. I was being kicked out of my own childhood home on Christmas Eve. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The guests were pretending not to stare, but I could feel their eyes on me. I saw pity on some faces, and cold amusement on others. I turned without another word, the shame so overwhelming it felt like I was suffocating. As I walked toward the door, my back straight, my head held high, I heard it. First, a small giggle from Blair. Then, Cynthia's low, triumphant chuckle. The sound of their laughter followed me out into the cold night air. The final, cruelest twist of the knife. I drove home in a daze, the cold, sticky wine on my dress, a stark reminder of what had just happened. When I got to my tiny one-bedroom apartment, I slid down the back of the door and finally let the tears fall. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who had a father who protected her. I cried for the mother I missed so desperately. And I cried out of sheer, helpless rage. They had called me poor, a failure, a loser, a nobody. They had kicked me out and laughed. That night, huddled in my small, cold apartment, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. It turned from fragile glass into solid steel. The tears stopped. The sadness receded, replaced a cold, quiet calm. They wanted me to be a nobody. Fine. I would be a nobody they never saw coming. This wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a declaration of war. And I was going to win. The days following Christmas were a gray, suffocating blur. The humiliation from that night replayed in my mind on a loop, each detail sharper and more painful than the last. Cynthia's sneer, Blair's fake apology, my father's silence, the laughter. It was a poison that seeped into everything, making my tiny apartment feel even smaller. The city outside colder and more unforgiving. I was completely alone, adrift in a sea of their judgment. The word they'd branded me with, loser, echoed in the silence, and for a few dark days I started to believe it. My part-time job as a barista barely covered my expenses. I'd walk home exhausted, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to my clothes, and stare at the pile of bills on my kitchen counter. The final blow came in the form of a crisp white envelope slid under my door. My landlord was raising the rent. It wasn't by much, but it was enough. Enough to push me over the edge from barely scraping by to officially not making it. I sat on my worn-out sofa, the letter trembling in my hand, and felt a wave of pure, unadulterated desperation wash over me. For the first time, I had no idea what I was going to do. The thought of having to crawl back to my father and ask for help, to face Cynthia's smug "I told you so" expression was more terrifying than being homeless. Just as I was sinking into that dark pit of despair, ready to give up, another letter arrived. This one was different. It wasn't a bill or junk mail. The envelope was made of thick, Jeremy paper, the kind that costs a fortune. My name and address were written in elegant, old-fashioned cursive. In the top left corner, the return address read, Abernethy and Sons, Attorneys at Law. Mr. Abernethy. I hadn't heard that name in years. He had been my maternal grandmother's lawyer, a man as sharp and sturdy as the oak desk he sat behind. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been my rock, the one person in my life who saw me for who I was, not who my father had married. She passed away 2 years ago, and I'd assumed her affairs were long settled. With a furrowed brow, I tore open the seal. The letter was brief and formal, requesting my presence at his office, at my earliest convenience, to discuss a matter pertaining to my grandmother's estate. A matter of some urgency. My heart gave a little flutter. Maybe it was a small token she'd left for me. A final gift from the grave. A few $1,000s would be a lifesaver right now. It would be a sign that someone, somewhere, was still looking out for me. His office was downtown, in one of those old, stately buildings with marble floors and brass elevators. It smelled of old books and polish. Mr. Abernethy hadn't changed at all. He was just as I remembered him, elderly, with a shock of white hair, piercing blue eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, and a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. He stood up as I entered, his expression serious but kind. "Savannah, thank you for coming so promptly," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Of course, Mr. Abernethy. Your letter sounded important." "It is," he said, sitting down and folding his hands on the massive desk. "This is about your grandmother, Eleanor. Specifically, her last will and testament." He slid a thick folder across the desk towards me. "I'm sure you're aware that your grandmother was a very astute woman. She was also not a fan of your father's second wife." That was the understatement of the century. My grandmother had despised Cynthia, seeing her for the grasping, materialistic woman she was from day one. "She was worried about you, Savannah," Mr. Abernethy continued. "She worried they would try to break your spirit. So she took precautions." He explained that my grandmother had left the bulk of her considerable fortune in a complex trust, but the main inheritance was locked away. What she had left for me, immediately accessible, was what she called a seed fund. It was a significant amount of money, enough to make my head spin, but it came with a very specific, very challenging condition. Eleanor stipulated that you could not access the primary inheritance until you proved you could stand on your own 2 feet, he explained. Her exact words were, "Until she has taken this seed and grown a forest from it, you have to use this money to build something of your own, a successful venture, without any help from your father. You have to prove to yourself, and to the world, that you are not the failure they want you to be. My mind was reeling. It was so much to take in. The money, the condition, the sheer brilliant strategy of it all. It wasn't just a handout. It was a challenge, a test. Mr. Abernathy then opened a smaller personal envelope. She also left you this letter. She asked that I read it to you when the time was right. I believe that time is now. His voice was gentle as he began to read my grandmother's familiar, forceful words. My dearest Savannah, if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. And you are feeling lost. I know them. My girl. I know they will try to make you small, to fit you into a box of their own making so they can feel big. They will call you weak because you are kind, and poor because you are not greedy. Do not listen. Their words are mirrors reflecting their own ugly souls, not yours. I have left you a weapon, not to fight them on their terms, but to build a world so large they can no longer touch you. This money is a tool. Be smart, be patient, be ruthless when you must. Learn everything, fail and get back up. Fail again, and get back up stronger. Your greatest revenge will not be a loud argument, but a quiet success they never see coming. They will try to make you small, Savannah. Use this to become too big for them to ignore. All my love. Grandma Eleanor. Tears streamed down my face. But these were not the tears of shame I'd cried on Christmas Eve. These were tears of gratitude, of love, of a fierce, burning resolve. My grandmother had not left me money. She had left me a blueprint, a mission. This was the beginning of my secret transformation. I looked up at Mr. Abernathy, my vision blurry. What do I do first? A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. First, he said, his eyes twinkling, we get to work. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, focused intensity. My life split into two completely separate realities. To the outside world, I was still Savannah Reyes, the girl who served you coffee with a tired smile. I kept my part-time job, kept living in my small apartment, kept up the appearance of someone just getting by. But when I got home each day, I shed that skin. I entered my secret war room, which was really just my cramped living room, now dominated by a second-hand desk and a powerful new laptop. With Mr. Abernathy acting as my secret mentor, my ally, my education began. He was a firm but patient guide. Don't rush, Savannah, he told me in our first strategy session. They think you're a fool. Let them. The most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. So I didn't do anything flashy. I didn't buy a fancy car or a new wardrobe. I enrolled in a series of online courses, pouring my grandmother's seed money into knowledge instead of things. Business management, corporate law, real estate investment. My life became a tangible struggle, a grueling cycle of work and study. I'd spend 8 hours on my feet at the coffee shop, my mind buzzing with orders for lattes and cappuccinos, and then I'd come home and spend another 8 hours hunched over my laptop, my mind buzzing with terms like capital gains, escrow and zoning ordinances. My social life vanished. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My diet consisted of coffee to stay awake and cheap takeout to save time. The corners of my eyes were permanently smudged with exhaustion. There were nights when I'd stare at complex financial projections until the numbers blurred together, my head throbbing, a wave of despair washing over me. This was so hard. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was in over my head. But then I would think of Cynthia's mocking laugh. I would picture the sight of my mother's photo album discarded like trash, and a fresh surge of adrenaline would course through me. Failure was not an option. Mr. Abernathy provided tough love guidance, not a safety net. He would review my coursework and my investment ideas with a critical eye. This is a weak proposal, Savannah. Your risk assessment is based on emotion, not data. Go back and do the math. Or you've misunderstood this clause in the contract. Read it again. The devil is always in the details. He wasn't handing me the answers, he was forcing me to find them myself. He was teaching me to be self-reliant, sharp, and as my grandmother had advised, ruthless when necessary. My first real test came about 3 months in. I found a small, run-down commercial property in a part of the city that was just beginning to gentrify. The numbers looked good. My research suggested it was undervalued. Pulling a significant chunk of my funds, I made an offer, my heart pounding as I signed the papers. Everything that could go wrong did. The inspection revealed hidden structural issues. The zoning approval got tied up in bureaucratic red tape. The contractor I'd hired tried to double his price halfway through the initial repairs. For 2 terrifying weeks, it looked like the entire deal was going to collapse, taking a huge portion of my grandmother's money with it. I was on the verge of near failure. I called Mr. Abernathy in a panic, my voice shaking. "It's a disaster. I'm going to lose everything." "Calm down," he said, his voice steady as a rock over the phone. "Panic is a luxury you can't afford. You have a contract with that builder. What does it say about cost overruns? You have a zoning application. Have you spoken to the clerk at the city planning office directly? Or just shuffled papers? Solve the problems, Savannah. Don't drown in them." His words shocked me back into focus. He was right. I spent the next 48 hours without sleep. I read every line of my contract and found the clause that locked in the contractor's price. I spent a full day at the city planning department, politely but persistently tracking down the person responsible for my application and getting a clear timeline. I found another inspector to give me a realistic quote on the structural repairs. I poured every last cent I had, including my meager personal savings, into salvaging the deal. It was an extreme personal sacrifice, cleaning out my own bank account to save the investment. But it worked. The deal was saved. I had stared into the abyss of failure and clawed my way back out. Standing in front of that small, unimpressive building, holding the new keys in a hand, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired, but it was the satisfying exhaustion of a battle won. I was learning. I was growing, and no one in my family had a clue. In their world, I was still just the poor barista, the family disappointment. The secret was safe. The war was just beginning. Months bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of work, study, and secret deals. The dark circles under my eyes were a permanent feature now, a testament to countless nights spent staring at spreadsheets and legal documents. The first property was a success. I'd managed to lease it to a small bakery, and the steady income it generated was the first real fruit of my labor. I'd reinvested the profit immediately, setting my sights on a duplex that needed work. My world had become a quiet, solitary grind. One Tuesday afternoon, I found myself in the bright, sterile aisles of a grocery store. I looked a mess. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours, having spent the night finalizing the paperwork on the duplex deal. My hair was thrown up in a messy bun. I was wearing an old, faded sweatshirt, and my face was pale with exhaustion. I was in the canned goods aisle, trying to remember if I had any soup left at home, when a familiar voice cut through my foggy brain. "Savannah? Is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking. It was my Aunt Carol, my stepmother Cynthia's sister. She stood there with her perfectly coiffed hair, an expensive cashmere sweater, her shopping cart filled with organic produce and artisanal cheeses. She was a permanent fixture in Cynthia's orbit, a loyal lady-in-waiting who enjoyed the perks of being associated with my father's wealth. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in my haggard appearance. It wasn't a look of concern, it was a look of horror, as if she'd just run into a homeless person she was vaguely related to. "Oh my," she said, her voice laced with that familiar, pitying tone my stepmother used so effectively. "You look tired, dear. Are you doing okay?" "I'm fine, Aunt Carol," I said, forcing a weak smile. I just wanted to grab my can of tomato soup and disappear. I stared at her. I wasn't invited. Cynthia had made it very clear I was banned, excluded. Aunt Carol knew that. She had been there on Christmas Eve. She had watched the entire humiliating spectacle unfold, and had done nothing. She had stood by silently as her own sister and niece tore me to shreds. I wasn't invited, I stated plainly, not letting her off the hook. She had the decency to look flustered for a moment. Her cheeks colored slightly. "Oh, well, you know how Cynthia is," she offered. A pathetic, cowardly excuse. She sees these ideas in her head. She was just so stressed about everything being perfect. There it was, the enabling, the quiet justification of cruelty to maintain her own comfort. She wasn't defending me. She wasn't angry on my behalf. She was just trying to smooth over the awkwardness the moment, to absolve herself of any responsibility. She didn't offer help. She didn't offer any real sympathy. "It's a shame," she continued, already taking a step back, her body language screaming that she wanted to flee. "We all missed you." The lie was so blatant, it was almost funny. I looked directly into her eyes, and I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. I let her see that I knew she was lying. I saw a flicker of panic in her expression. She couldn't handle the direct, unspoken confrontation. "Well," she chirped, her voice unnaturally bright, "I have to run. So much to do. Take care of yourself, Savannah." And just like that, she pushed her cart past me and practically scurried down the aisle, disappearing around the corner without a backward glance. I stood there for a long moment, the can of soup cold in my hand. The encounter, as brief as it was profoundly clarifying. For a long time, I had held onto a sliver of hope that someone else in the family, someone like Aunt Carol, might secretly be on my side. That brief, awkward interaction in the grocery store destroyed that illusion completely. Her silence wasn't neutral, it was an active choice. Her cowardice was a form of betrayal just as cutting in its own way as Cynthia's overt cruelty. It reinforced a lesson I was slowly learning. I was truly completely on my own in this. And that was okay. I didn't need enablers or fair-weather family members. Their weakness only wobbled my resolve. I didn't need them to save me. I was going to save myself. I grabbed my can of soup and walked to the checkout, my shoulders a little straighter than before. The fire inside me burned a little hotter. The duplex was another success. I oversaw the renovations myself, learning to negotiate with plumbers and electricians, learning the difference between cheap fixes and quality work. I leased out both units within a week of them being ready. The passive income was starting to build. My secret little empire was growing, brick by brick, deal by deal. I funneled everything back into the business, officially incorporating it under a discreet name that meant nothing to anyone but me. Reyes Holdings. On paper, I was the founder and CEO of a burgeoning property management company. In reality, I was still the girl who poured coffee and wore clothes from the thrift store. The contrast was a secret I savored. The change in me was subtle, but I could feel it. I walked differently. I spoke with more confidence, even when taking a coffee order. The constant anxiety about money had been replaced by the focused stress of managing assets. It was a better kind of stress. It was the stress of creation, not desperation. One evening, after a long day, I was scrolling mindlessly through a social media feed on my phone, and then I saw it. A glossy, professional photo posted by one of the city's top lifestyle magazines. It was my stepsister, Blair, and a handsome, smiling man. Blair was holding up her left hand, a massive diamond ring sparkling on her finger. The caption read, "A match made in heaven." Tech titan Liam Vance proposes to socialite Blair Croft. Sources say the couple is planning a lavish engagement party to celebrate. My breath caught in my throat. Blair was engaged. Her fiancé, Liam, was a legitimate rising star in the tech world. He was everything my stepmother could have ever dreamed of for her daughter: wealthy, successful, from a good family. They were the ultimate power couple, the golden couple. A pang of the old hurt, the familiar feeling of being left behind, pricked at me for a moment. There she was, living a fairy tale life, while I was hiding in the shadows, fighting my secret war. But then, something else replaced the hurt. A cold, sharp, calculating thought. An opportunity. A few days later, I had a scheduled progress meeting with Mr. Abernathy in his quiet, mahogany-paneled office. I laid out the financials for him, the income from the first property, the successful flip of the duplex, and my projections for the next quarter. I had built a solid foundation. Mr. Abernathy reviewed the documents, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. Eleanor would be so proud. Savannah, he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. You've done more than just grow a forest from her seed. You've cultivated an entire ecosystem. You are very, very close to fulfilling the conditions of the trust. As our meeting concluded and he walked me to the door, he paused. You know, he said, in a casual, offhand way, it's funny how the landscape of this city changes. There's a new luxury resort that just opened up a few months ago out by the lake, the Willow Creek Lake Resort. It's become the go-to venue for the city's elite, engagements, charity galas. Everyone who is anyone wants to be seen there. He was just making conversation, but the name hit me like a lightning bolt. The Willow Creek Lake Resort. I had a feeling, a deep, gut-level premonition, that this resort was going to be important. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead of researching properties, I researched Liam Vance, I researched his company, and I researched the Willow Creek Lake Resort. A plan began to form in my mind, a plan so audacious, so daring, it terrified and thrilled me at the same time. The whispers of a wedding had just given me the idea for my grand finale. The plan was insane. It was a gamble so big it could either secure my victory for good or leave me in ruins. The Willow Creek Lake Resort. It was the crown jewel of the region's social scene, a sprawling, elegant property on the shores of a pristine lake. It was the kind of place my stepmother, Cynthia, talked about with reverence. Getting married there, or hosting a party there, was the ultimate status symbol, and according to Mr. Abernathy's discreet inquiries, it was for sale. The current owner, a man in his late 70s, was retiring and wanted a quiet, off-market deal. He didn't want a bidding war, or a corporate takeover. He wanted to sell to someone who would respect the legacy of what he had built. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was also wildly outside of my financial reach. Or so it seemed. I spent the next week locked in my apartment, running numbers until my vision blurred. I took every asset my little company, Reyes Holdings, had. I leveraged the equity from my other properties. I put together a business proposal that was the culmination of everything I had learned. Every late night, every moment of struggle. It was a detailed, ambitious plan for the resort's future, one that honored its legacy while expanding its profitability. I was taking the biggest risk of my life, putting every single chip I had on the table. With trembling hands, I submitted the offer through Mr. Abernathy. And then, the waiting began. It was the most agonizing week of my existence. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. I jumped at every shadow, my anxiety a constant screaming hum beneath my skin. I went through the motions at the coffee shop, a ghost in a barista's apron, my mind a million miles away, replaying every possible outcome. What if he said no? I would be financially overextended, my progress stalled, my secret war exposed as a failure before it was even over. The thought was paralyzing. I was at home staring blankly at my laptop screen, when the call finally came. It was Mr. Abernathy. I answered on the first ring, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Savannah, he said, and I couldn't read his tone. Yes? I whispered, my throat dry. There was a long pause. It stretched for an eternity. Then I heard him let out a slow breath. The owner has accepted your offer. I sank into my chair, the phone still pressed to my ear, unable to speak. A wave of relief so powerful, It almost made me dizzy, washed over me. He was incredibly impressed with your proposal, Savannah, Mr. Abernathy continued, a note of pride in his voice. He said you were the only one who understood that the resort wasn't just a business, it was a home. He said, it's in good hands. The deal would close in a week. The moment I hung up the phone, I felt a fundamental shift, not just in my circumstances, but in the very atmosphere around me. It was like a change in barometric pressure, a silent thunderclap that only I could hear. I, Savannah Reyes, the girl they mocked for her thrift store dress, the girl they called poor and a nobody, was now the owner of the most exclusive, sought-after resort in the entire state. The power of that secret was intoxicating. I walked through the next few days in a dreamlike state. I still served coffee. I still went home to my tiny apartment. Nothing on the outside had changed, but everything on the inside was different. I was no longer fighting from the trenches. I was commanding the entire board. I told no one. Only Mr. Abernathy knew. He called me the day the papers were officially signed, and the transaction was complete. He was ecstatic. You did it, my dear, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have officially met and exceeded every single one of your grandmother's conditions. The final phase of the will reading can now be executed. The final phase? I asked, my heart starting to pound again. I had been so focused on the resort, I had almost forgotten. Yes, he said. The main inheritance. The asset that was locked away until you proved yourself. Do you know what it is? A slow smile spread across my face. I looked around my tiny rented apartment, a place I would soon be leaving behind forever. Yes, Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice steady and clear. I have a very good idea of what it is. The biggest secret of all was about to come into play. The power shift was complete. A week later it arrived, tucked into my small metal mailbox between a pizza coupon and a credit card offer, was an envelope so opulent it looked completely out of place. It was thick and creamy, with my name written in shimmering gold calligraphy. I didn't even need to open it to know what it was. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the invitation. The cardstock was heavy, the edges gilded in gold leaf. In elegant, looping script, it read, Cynthia and Robert Reyes, together with the Vance family, request the pleasure of your company at a party to celebrate the engagement of their children, Blair Croft and Liam Vance. And then, at the bottom, the detail that made the air catch in my throat. The venue. Saturday, the 10th of June, at 7 o'clock in the evening, the Willow Creek Lake Resort. My resort. They were throwing the most important party of their lives in my resort. And they had absolutely no idea. It was a poetic justice so perfect it was almost unbelievable. I ran my thumb over the embossed name of the venue, a giddy, triumphant feeling bubbling up inside me. But there was more. Tucked behind the invitation was a smaller personal note, written on Cynthia's pale pink stationery. Her handwriting was a series of sharp, aggressive peaks and valleys. Savannah, it began. After much discussion, your father and I have decided to give you one last chance to be part of this family. Blair's engagement is a monumental event for us, and we are willing to overlook your previous behavior. For the sake of a united front, please make an effort. This is an important night for Blair, and we will be surrounded by very important people. No thrift store surprises this time. Your presence is expected, not requested. The arrogance was breathtaking. The condescension dripped from every word. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a gilded trap. They weren't inviting me, they were summoning me. They wanted to parade me around as the reformed black sheep, a testament to their supposed generosity. It was designed to be my final public humiliation, a chance for them to show everyone how they had magnanimously allowed the family failure back into the fold. For a moment, a wave of hesitation washed over me. Did I even need this? I had already won. I owned the resort. I held all the cards. Why walk into the lion's den when I already owned the zoo? I could just ignore the invitation, go on with my new life, and let them wonder forever. But then, I thought of my grandmother's letter. Her words echoed in my mind, as clear as the day Mr. Abernathy read them to me. Don't let them erase you. This was never just about money or property. It was about taking back my narrative. It was about standing in the very room where they planned to diminish me and showing them, and everyone else, who I really was. It was about justice. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Abernathy. I got the invitation, I said, my voice calm. I imagined you would, he replied. What are you going to do? I was thinking of declining, I admitted. Is it worth it? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Your grandmother believed that a victory unseen is only half a victory. Savannah, this isn't about gloating. It's about closing a chapter. It's about ensuring they can never again define you by their standards. He was right. This was my checkmate moment. I couldn't just win the game. I had to knock over the king. Okay, I said, a new wave of resolve hardening my voice. I'll go. I walked over to my laptop and pulled up the online RSVP page for the event. I typed in my name, Savannah Reyes, and clicked the button. Attending. The trap was set, but they had no idea who was the hunter and who was the prey. The night of the party arrived on a wave of cool, early summer air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as I drove my modest sedan towards the lake. I had spent the afternoon preparing, not with a sense of dread, but with a feeling of profound electric calm. This wasn't a performance of survival anymore. It was a debut. I chose my outfit with meticulous care. It wasn't a designer gown that screamed for attention. Instead, I wore a simple, exquisitely tailored navy blue dress that fell just below my knees. The fabric was a heavy silk that moved with a quiet grace. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. It whispered confidence, not wealth. It was the armor of a woman who knew her own value and didn't need a price tag to prove it. As I turned onto the long, winding road that led to the resort, my heart gave a little skip. There it was, a new, beautifully carved wooden sign at the entrance, the Willow Creek Lake Resort. And underneath, in smaller, tasteful brass letters, was the name of the management company, Reyes Holdings. My name. My legacy, seeing it there, solid and real, sent a jolt of pure power through me. I pulled up to the grand entrance where a line of luxury cars was dropping off guests. The valet, a young man in a sharp uniform, approached my window. I had personally briefed the senior staff, including the head of valet, a few days prior. Good evening, I said, handing him my keys. The name is Savannah Reyes. He didn't blink. There was no flicker of confusion, no questioning glance at my humble car compared to the Bentleys and Porsches around it. He simply took the key and gave a slight, respectful nod. Welcome, Miss Reyes. We'll take good care of it. That small, professional courtesy was the first taste of my new reality. I walked up the stone steps and through the massive double doors into the main ballroom. The party was in full swing. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the crowd, and waiters weaved through the guests with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was a scene straight out of a magazine, a world I had only ever looked at from the outside. But tonight, every crystal glass, every polished floorboard, every smiling employee belonged to me. I scanned the room, a general taking in the battlefield before the first shot was fired. And then I saw him. Near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake stood Blair's fiancé, Liam. He was handsome, just like in the photos, with a confident but easy smile. He was talking to an older couple, but his eyes met mine across the room. He saw me, and a flicker of polite confusion crossed his face. He'd likely been fed the family-approved story that I was the troubled, poor relation, the embarrassing black sheep. My simple elegance didn't fit that narrative. He excused himself from his conversation and walked towards me. His approach was direct and curious, not dismissive. "You must be Savannah," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm. "I'm Liam. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "It's nice to meet you too, Liam. Congratulations on your engagement," I said, my voice even and steady. "Thank you. Blair talks about you," he said, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. He was clearly intelligent, observant. He wasn't buying the whole story he'd been sold. There was a questioning look in his eyes, a sense that the puzzle pieces weren't quite fitting together. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. His neutrality was the perfect blank canvas on which to paint the truth. Our conversation was cut short by a sharp intake of breath nearby. I turned my head slightly and saw my Aunt Carol. She was standing by the appetizer table, a canapé halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. She froze like a deer in headlights upon seeing me talking to Liam. She flinched, physically recoiled, and then busied herself with rearranging the napkins. Her back turned to me, avoiding my gaze completely. Her cowardice was so predictable it was almost comforting. And then I felt their presence before I even saw them. The atmosphere shifted. The predatory energy was unmistakable. Cynthia and Blair were cutting a path through the crowd, their smiles fixed and sharp, their eyes locked on me. They had spotted their prey. The calm was over. The storm was about to break. Cynthia and Blair cornered me near the grand stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the ballroom. The spot was central, well lit, and surrounded by guests. It was the perfect stage for the execution they had planned. "Savannah, you actually came," Blair sneered, her eyes raking over my simple navy dress with disdain. The massive diamond on her finger caught the light, a flashing beacon of her status. "I'm shocked. Did you have to rent that dress for the evening?" I didn't rise to the bait. I simply smiled, a calm, small smile that I knew would infuriate her more than any angry retort. "No, Blair. I bought it." Cynthia circled me slowly, like a shark sizing up its meal. Her own gown was a cascade of black sequins, and she dripped with diamonds. She looked every bit the queen of her social kingdom. "Well, I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice a low purr of menace. "But I hope you plan on behaving. We have very important people here tonight. This event is a reflection on our family, and we can't afford any embarrassments." Her words were meant for me, but she spoke them loudly enough for the surrounding guests, including Liam, who was still standing nearby, to hear clearly. She was drawing an audience, setting the stage. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation trying to creep up my neck, but I pushed it down. Tonight was different. I wasn't their victim anymore. As if on cue, Cynthia stepped onto the slightly raised hearth of the fireplace, tapping a champagne glass with her fingernail to get everyone's attention. The string quartet quieted. A hush fell over the room. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she began, her voice resonating with practiced confidence. "Robert and I are just so thrilled to welcome you all here tonight, to this magnificent place to celebrate Blair and Liam." She gestured grandly around the room, a proprietary air about her, as if she were the lady of this manor. It's nights like these that remind us of what's truly important. Legacy, family, and of course, having good taste. Her eyes found me in the crowd, and she gave me a pointed, chilling smile. It's about knowing your place in the world, and celebrating those who have truly earned their success. The insult was clear. A final, public arrow aimed directly at my heart. The guests murmured in polite agreement. Blair stood beside her, beaming, soaking in the glory. My father stood a few feet away, looking proud and uncomfortable all at once. And at that exact perfect moment, two figures approached our little group by the fireplace. Before they could even begin to process the impossible, the second figure stepped forward. It was Mr. Abernethy, my ally, my mentor, looking impeccable in a dark suit and holding a handsome leather folio. He positioned himself so that he was addressing our entire family group, but his first words were for me. He gave me a respectful nod. Ms. Reyes, my apologies for the public nature of this, but the timing is critical. The entire party was now watching, dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. Everyone sensed that the real main event was just beginning. Mr. Abernathy then turned his gaze upon my father and Cynthia. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight of authority that commanded absolute attention. Cynthia, Robert, he began, his tone calm and deliberate. As the executor of the late Eleanor Reyes's final will and testament, I am here to formally inform you that with all conditions of the trust having been met and exceeded by the primary beneficiary, the final asset transfer is now complete and legally binding. He opened the folio. With a precise, almost theatrical motion, he pulled out a single crisp legal document. He held it up so they could see the bold heading. Property deed, it read. He stepped forward and handed the document directly to a stunned, speechless Cynthia. This, Mr. Abernathy announced to the silent, watching room, is a legal notice. Ownership of the residential property located at 140 Willow Creek Lane. He paused, letting the address sink in. Their address, my childhood home, has been transferred, in its entirety, to Miss Savannah Reyes. Effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock. I looked at my father. He turned pale, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a marble statue. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of his lungs. He stumbled back a step, his hand finding the mantelpiece to steady himself. Cynthia was completely speechless. She stared down at the property deed in her hand, the document that proved she was now a guest in a house that belonged to the very girl she had kicked out on Christmas Eve. Her world, so carefully constructed, had just been demolished in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. The silence that followed Mr. Abernathy's announcement was deafening. It was a thick, heavy blanket of shock that smothered the entire ballroom. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Cynthia and Blair stood frozen, like statues in a tragedy, the architects of their own spectacular downfall. My father looked as though he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. Then, the silence was broken. The reactions of the supporting cast began a ripple effect that turned my quiet victory into an undeniable public conquest. The first to move was Liam. His role in this drama was now pivotal. He looked from Blair's horrified, contorted face to my calm expression. He looked at the property deed in Cynthia's trembling hand. He looked at the resort manager, who was still waiting patiently for my instructions. The pieces clicked into place for him, not with a quiet snap, but with the force of a thunderclap. His eyes, which had been filled with polite confusion earlier, were now wide with a mixture of pure shock and something else. Undeniable, profound respect. Slowly, deliberately, he took a step away from Blair's side. It was a small movement, but in the charged atmosphere of that room, it was a seismic shift. He walked directly over to me, his gaze never leaving mine. His public validation was everything. He had chosen a side. "Savannah," he said, his voice clear and strong enough for everyone nearby to hear. It was filled with genuine awe. You own this resort? And the house?" He let out a low whistle of disbelief. "That's incredible." His words were the spark that lit the fuse. A wave of frantic whispers erupted through the crowd. "She owns this place. Did he say she owns the house? That's Robert's daughter? The one they never talk about?" The narrative was being rewritten in real time, right before my family's horrified eyes. They were no longer the powerful hosts. They were the fools in a story that was much bigger than they were. Next came Aunt Carol. Her face was a comical mask of panic and desperation. She saw the tide turning with terrifying speed and immediately tried to swim for the winning shore. She scurried over, her face stretched into a grotesque, fawning smile. "Savannah, dear," she gushed, grabbing my arm. We We always knew you had it in you. Such a clever girl. We are all just so proud. Her attempt to save face was so transparently pathetic that a few people nearby actually scoffed. Liam shot her a look of pure disgust. Her betrayal of Cynthia and Blair was as swift and cowardly as her earlier betrayal of me. Everyone saw it for what it was. Standing proudly beside me, a silent guardian, was Mr. Abernathy. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was confirmation enough. He simply gave me a small, proud smile, a final, quiet vote of confidence. I was no longer the lone, humiliated girl by the fireplace. I was flanked by a new, powerful fiancé, a respected lawyer, and the deference of the resort staff. The crowd's gaze, once full of pity for me, had now shifted to scorn for my tormentors. Cynthia, Blair, and my father were on an island, completely isolated in the middle of their own party. My father finally found his voice. He looked at me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. The veil of Cynthia's influence had been ripped away, and all that was left was a deep, gut-wrenching regret. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know," but I wasn't looking at him. My eyes were locked on Cynthia. She was shaking now, her perfectly manicured hands clutching the property deed as if it were a serpent that had bitten her. Her face was a ruin of makeup and fury. All her power, all her social standing, had evaporated in an instant. "You," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was barely audible. "You little nobody." The word, once so powerful, so full of sting, was now utterly weightless. It was a pathetic, empty insult from a queen who had just lost her castle. I looked her right in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My voice was perfectly calm, perfectly clear, and it cut through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You were right, Cynthia. My thrift store dress never belonged in your house." I let the words hang there for a beat. "But now, your house belongs to me." Checkmate. I held her gaze for one final second, letting her see the absolute finality in my eyes. Then I turned. I gave a slight nod to Liam, a grateful smile to Mr. Abernathy, and I walked away from the fireplace, leaving them standing in the smoldering ruins of their own making. The sound of Blair's engagement party, once a symphony of their success, had crumbled into the shocked, whispering silence of their defeat. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, poor, failure, nobody, only have the power you allow them to have. True strength isn't about fitting into their world, it's about building your own. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? I believe everyone has a story of quiet strength. Let me know yours in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning pain into power. Thanks for watching.